For 7 years, the nurse arrived at 4:30 a.m. Bars on her cabin windows, welded from the inside. At the logging truck disaster, she commanded 22 casualties with military precision. Then victim 17 opened his eyes. She whispered one word that changed everything. Impossible. The man on the stretcher was supposed to be dead, and the town was about to discover their ice queen had been running from more than just her past. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If you enjoy stories of hidden truth and quiet strength, consider subscribing. She checked his wrist. Russian military watch, the same model she wore before Kabul. The digital clock read 4:17 a.m. when her hand killed the alarm before it could sound. Vesper Crane sat up in one fluid motion, no stretch, no yawn, no transition between sleep and wakefulness. And her bare feet touched the cold floorboards in the exact same spot they had touched for 2,555 mornings. The cabin was dark. She did not turn on the light. The pull-up bar mounted in the doorframe waited. She gripped it with hands that knew the exact width, the precise angle. Her breath formed clouds in the February air. 1, 2, 3. The counting was automatic, rhythmic, a metronome of muscle memory. At 73, she dropped and moved to the bathroom. The shower ran cold for exactly 4 minutes. When she emerged, frost still clung to the corners of the single window. The window had bars welded across it, from the inside. Anyone looking at the cabin from the road would see a simple structure, weathered wood, a stone chimney, nothing remarkable. They would not see the bars. They would not know the door had 3 deadbolts and a security bar. They would not see the motion sensors she had buried along the tree line or the security camera disguised as a birdhouse. She dressed in scrubs the color of faded denim. The fabric was cotton, worn soft from years of washing. In the kitchen, she made coffee in a French press. No machine, no sound except water boiling and the slow depression of the plunger. She drank it black while standing at the window, watching the access road that led to Route 14. The dog tags hung from a thin chain around her neck. She tucked them under her scrub top where they rested against her sternum, 2 pieces of stamped metal that never came off. Not in the shower, not during surgery, not ever. The engraving was worn smooth in places from years of her thumb running over the letters. But she did not need to read them to know what they said. Her truck sat in the gravel driveway, a 2017 Ford with Oregon plates that had never been updated despite 7 years in Tennessee. The inspection sticker was current, the registration was valid. But the plates stayed Oregon because changing them meant filling out forms, appearing in databases, creating records that could be cross-referenced and traced. Under the driver's seat, bolted to the frame with grade 8 hardware, sat a locked metal case, fireproof, waterproof, weighing 14 pounds. She had never opened it in front of anyone. She opened it once every 6 months to verify the contents, always alone, always at night. Inside were things that did not match the life of a small-town nurse, cash in 5 different currencies. There are 3 passports with her photograph and 3 different names, a satellite phone with a battery that stayed charged, a folding knife with a blade length that exceeded legal carry limits in 42 states. She drove Route 14 through morning mist that clung to the valley like cotton batting. The headlights cut tunnels through the gray, illuminating guardrails and mile markers and the occasional deer standing motionless at the tree line. At mile marker 17, a crop duster helicopter passed overhead, running an early spray pattern over the Hendricks soybean operation. Her hands tightened on the wheel. Just her hands. Her face did not change. Her breathing did not change. But her knuckles went white for 3 seconds until the helicopter sound faded behind the ridgeline. Then her grip relaxed, and her hands returned to 10 and 2. The radio played local news, livestock prices, a church fundraiser, road construction on Highway 58. She listened without hearing, her eyes scanning the mirrors more than the road ahead. The rear view was angled to show the road behind her, not her own face. The side mirrors were adjusted wide, giving maximum coverage of approach angles. Ridgemont Valley Clinic appeared through the mist at 4:47 a.m., exactly when it always appeared. A single-story structure of brick and glass, built in 1987, renovated in 2003, serving a population of 4,000 across 3 counties. She parked in the same space she always parked, backing in so the truck faced the exit. Before she opened the door, she checked all 3 mirrors. Clear, she counted to 5. Then she stepped out. The clinic keys hung on a carabiner clipped to her belt loop. She unlocked the front door and stepped inside, relocking it behind her. The alarm panel glowed red. She had 30 seconds. She entered the code with fingers that moved faster than thought. 8 digits. The panel beeped twice and went green. The lights came on in sequence as she moved through the building. Reception, triage, examination rooms 1 through 4, the supply closet, the break room, the surgical suite. She checked every window lock, every door, every exit. Her route was identical every morning, a security sweep disguised as the routine of an early employee. The trauma bay occupied the back corner of the clinic, a space designed for stabilization before transport to Ridgemont Community Hospital 12 miles north. The equipment here exceeded what most rural clinics maintained: chest tubes, combat gauze, tourniquets rated for arterial bleeds, a portable ultrasound that cost $40,000. Vesper had requisitioned every item, arguing medical necessity, citing response times and distance to the nearest Level 2 trauma center. Dr. Holden Merrick had signed the purchase orders without question. He arrived at 5:15 a.m., carrying his travel mug that leaked from the lid and left coffee rings on every surface. His white coat had a stain on the left pocket that had been there for 3 years. He was 52, kind-eyed, perpetually rumpled, and he had never once asked Vesper why she arrived 90 minutes before her shift started. Morning, Vesper. He set his mug on the counter and it immediately began forming a new ring. You get any sleep or do you just live here now? I sleep fine. He studied her for a moment, at the way doctors study patients when they are looking for things unsaid. Then he smiled and moved to his office. The morning staff arrived in stages. Bryony Marsh at 6 a.m., always exactly on time, always carrying a thermal lunch bag and a travel mug that matched her scrubs. She was 38, sharp-tongued, efficient, and she had been calling Vesper the Ice Queen for 6 years, not to her face. But Vesper had heard it through the break room wall, had seen it in the group text chain that someone had accidentally left open on the computer in exam room 3. Ice Queen's already here. Bryony did not look up from her bag as she spoke. 7 years, never late, never sick, never human. Vesper was restocking the crash cart and did not respond. Atticus Webb arrived at 6:30 a.m. in an ambulance that needed new brake pads, and the squeal echoed across the parking lot every morning. He was 34, a paramedic with the county service, former Marine with tattoos covering both forearms, and a service record he did not discuss. When he walked, he moved with the economical gait of someone who had carried weight over distance. When he stood with his back to walls and his eyes on doors. He watched Vesper sometimes, not the way men usually watched women. He watched the way sentries watch perimeters. He watched the way people watch for things that do not fit. Morning, Sergeant. He said it like a joke, but his eyes were not joking. It's just Vesper. Right. He filled his coffee cup and leaned against the counter. You ever serve? I was a medic. Which branch? Does it matter? She turned back to the crash cart. The conversation was over. He did not push. But she felt his attention on her back for another 10 seconds before he moved to the ambulance bay. Scout Holloway arrived last, at 6:45 a.m., 18 years old and 6 months into a nursing assistant program at the community college. She had blonde hair she wore in a ponytail and the kind of wide-eyed optimism that usually died within 2 years of healthcare work. She followed Vesper everywhere, took notes in a spiral-bound notebook, asked questions that showed she was actually listening. How do you know where to put the IV before you even look for a vein? Anatomy. The veins follow predictable patterns. You learn the map, but you don't even look. You just touch, and you know. Muscle memory. You do it enough times, your hands remember. Scout wrote this down. She wrote everything down. Vesper had seen the notebook once. It left open on the break room table. The handwriting was careful, precise, the notes were detailed. There was a section titled, Things VJ Does That Don't Make Sense. The list had 17 items. The morning clinic ran its standard rhythm: medication refills, blood pressure checks, a farmer named Dalton with an infected laceration from a fence post, a child with croup, an elderly woman whose pacemaker needed monitoring. Vesper moved through the schedule with mechanical efficiency, her hands steady, her voice calm, her face expressionless. At 10:30 a.m., an elderly patient named Harriet mentioned she was planning a helicopter tour over the Smoky Mountains for her anniversary. Just talking, making conversation while Vesper drew blood. Vesper's hand stopped. just for half a second. The needle was already in the vein, and the vacuum tube already filling. But her hand froze mid-draw and her eyes went distant, focused on something that was not in the room. Harriet did not notice. Scout did. The blood draw finished. Vesper labeled the tube, removed the tourniquet, applied pressure to the site. Her movements were correct, professional, automatic. But Scout had seen the hesitation, had seen the way Vesper's breathing changed when the word helicopter was spoken. At noon, a farmer named Jessup came in with a chainsaw wound on his left forearm. Deep, arterial spray. He had wrapped it in a dish towel that was now soaked through. Vesper took him directly to the surgical suite. Scout assisted. Holden supervised. Vesper's hands moved with absolute precision. Clamp, suture, tie. The movements were fluid, practiced. Is too smooth for someone whose nursing license said she had only worked in rural clinics. While she worked, she gave Scout instructions in a low voice. Anatomical landmarks, vein locations, suture technique. Then she said something else. Something that sounded like Russian. A positioning instruction. The words came out automatic, unthinking, and she caught herself mid-sentence and switched to English. Sorry, wrong language. Holden looked up. Scout's eyes widened. You speak Russian? Some. Where did you learn Russian? Vesper did not answer. She was closing the wound now, her focus absolute. The conversation was over. Scout glanced at Holden. He gave a small shake of his head. Do not push. At 1 p.m., Sheriff Huck Bridger arrived with a DUI case that needed blood work before booking. Huck was 47, and a 20-year veteran of rural law enforcement, a man who noticed things. He stood in the doorway of the exam room longer than necessary, watching Vesper work. 7 years you've been here. That's right. Nobody knows anything about you. I'm a nurse. That's all that matters. That's what concerns me. He shifted his weight. People who don't want to be known usually have reasons. I value privacy. Privacy's one thing. What you've got is something else. She finished the blood draw, labeled the vial, handed it to him. Is there anything else, Sheriff? He studied her for another moment. Then he took the vial and left. Vesper's lunch break was at 1:30 p.m. She did not go to the break room where the other staff ate and complained and scrolled through their phones. She went to the supply closet, the one at the end of the hall that was larger than necessary, the one with a door that locked. She sat on a folding chair between shelves of gauze and sterile drapes and ate a sandwich she had made that morning. Turkey, mustard, wheat bread, the same sandwich she ate every day. While she ate, she counted. Behind the extra linens on the top shelf, hidden behind packages of adult diapers and boxes of exam gloves, sat a black backpack. Not medical supplies, not clinic property. Hers. She stood on the chair and pulled it down, unzipped it, verified the contents. Cash, bound in rubber bands. $32,000 in mixed denominations. 3 phones, prepaid, still in packaging. A first aid kit that included items not available over the counter. Antibiotics, morphine, surgical staples, a change of clothes in neutral colors. Hiking boots. A road atlas with certain routes highlighted in pencil. She had packed this bag 4 years ago and verified its contents every Wednesday since. She had never needed it, but it was there. Ready. She was replacing the bag when the door rattled, someone trying the handle. She zipped the backpack, shoved it behind the linens, stepped down from the chair. By the time the door opened, she was standing at the shelf, apparently looking for gauze. Scout stood in the doorway. Oh, sorry. I didn't know anyone was in here, just restocking. Scout's eyes went to the folding chair, to the sandwich wrapper on the small side table, to Vesper's face. She did not say anything, but she saw. She always saw. At 2:47 p.m., the scanner on the wall crackled to life. Atticus's voice came through, professional but tight with urgency. All units. Major accident Route 27 at mile marker 42. Logging truck versus bridge. Multiple casualties. All medical personnel respond. Repeat, all medical personnel respond. Vesper was moving before he finished speaking. She grabbed the trauma kit from the supply room, the one she had assembled herself with equipment the clinic did not officially stock. Bryony and Holden were right behind her. How many casualties? Holden was pulling on his coat. Scanner said multiple. Atticus sounded stressed. They took 2 vehicles, Holden and Bryony in his sedan, Vesper alone in her truck. She drove fast but controlled, taking curves at speeds that made the tires sing but never lose grip. Her hands were steady on the wheel. Her breathing was measured. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. Route 27 was a 2-lane mountain road that followed the ridge above Whiskey Creek. At mile marker 42, the road crossed a 60-year-old bridge that the county had been meaning to replace for a decade. The bridge was narrow, single lane, with a weight limit posted at 12 tons. The logging truck weighed 19. The bridge had not collapsed, but it had buckled. The truck had jackknifed across both lanes, its load of raw timber scattered like pickup sticks. 2 cars were pinned under the logs. A minivan had gone off the shoulder and rolled. A motorcyclist lay in the road. People were screaming. Vesper pulled up and parked at an angle, blocking traffic. She grabbed the trauma kit and a hard hat from behind her seat and stepped out into controlled chaos. 22 victims. She counted them in 15 seconds. Her eyes moved across the scene with tactical precision, categorizing, prioritizing, assessing. Red tags, yellow tags, green tags, black tags. The triage system was automatic in her head. Atticus was working on a chest wound. 2 other paramedics were trying to free a woman from the minivan. Volunteer firefighters were attempting to move logs with a winch that was tangled. Nobody was in charge. Everyone was working independently. It was chaos. Vesper set down her kit and raised her voice. It was not loud, but it carried. Listen up. Heads turned. The authority in her voice was absolute. Atticus. Triage green tags to the south shoulder. Walking wounded. Bryony. Airway assessment on everyone. ABC protocol. Scout. You're with me. She was already moving. Atticus stared at her for half a second. Then he moved too. And Vesper went to the worst cases first. A man trapped under the truck with bilateral femur fractures and probable internal bleeding. She started an IV with hands that did not shake, hung fluids, administered pain medication, gave orders to the firefighters about extraction angles and weight distribution. She used terms that small-town nurses did not typically know. Tactical field medicine, military triage protocols. She moved to the next victim. Chest decompression. She had a needle in hand before the paramedic had finished his assessment. The hiss of released pressure was immediate. The man's breathing eased. Where did you learn that? The paramedic stared at her. Moved to the next patient. She worked through the scene like a surgical team of one, directing, delegating, deciding. A woman went into labor in one of the pinned cars. Vesper delivered the baby in the front seat with Scout assisting, using shoelaces to tie off the umbilical cord and plastic bags for a sterile field. Scout was shaking. How did you know how to do that? Twice in Syria, once in Yemen. Vesper's hands were washing the newborn with water from someone's thermos. Her voice was clinical, detached. Then she froze. Scout saw it. Vesper, what's wrong? But Vesper was not listening. She was staring at victim 17, a man, early 40s, unconscious, tattoos covering his forearms, Cyrillic script, Russian Orthodox crosses, the markings of someone from a world that did not belong on a Tennessee mountain road. Vesper handed the baby to Scout without looking away from the man. Get her to the ambulance. But what about... Go. Scout went. Vesper walked to victim 17. Holden was there, checking vitals. He's stable. Concussion. Possible rib fractures. We'll transport him with the next wave. Vesper knelt beside the man. Her hands were shaking now. For the first time in 7 years, her hands were shaking. She reached out and touched his neck, checking for a pulse. But that was not what she was checking for. Her fingers found a scar. Small. Precise. The kind of scar a knife makes when it is pressed just deep enough to send a message without killing. She had seen this scar before. She had seen this face before. In another place. Another life. When both of them were different people with different names. Her lips moved. The word was barely a whisper. Impossible. Holden looked up. You know him? Vesper did not answer. She was checking his wallet now. Her hands were steady again, controlled by force of will. Now, the driver's license read Dmitry Orlov. Ridgemont address. Tennessee resident since 2021. Atticus approached. His boots were loud on the asphalt. He stopped when he saw Vesper's face. What's wrong? She looked at him, then back at Dmitry, then at his wrist where a watch hung loose. Russian military issue. Vostok Komandersky, the same model she had worn. Before Kabul. Before the crash. Before she died. Vesper. Atticus knelt beside her. Talk to me. He's supposed to be dead. Her voice was hollow. What? This man. She touched Dimitri's forearm, where the tattoos marked him as someone from a world she had left behind. He's supposed to be dead. How do you know that? But she did not answer. She was checking his neck again. The scar was there, the proof. This was not a mistake, not a coincidence. This was Dmitry Orlov, Captain GRU. Intelligence officer, traitor, the man who had sold out her unit 7 years ago, the man who had caused the ambush that killed Martinez and Hopkins, the man who had disappeared into witness protection while she had staged her own death to escape the contracts that followed. And somehow, impossibly, they had both ended up in Ridgemont, Tennessee. Population 4,000, middle of nowhere, end of the earth. Neither knowing the other was there, until now. Atticus put a hand on her shoulder. Vesper, we need to load him. She stood. Her legs were steady. Her face was blank. The Ice Queen was back. But inside, everything was breaking apart. They loaded Dmitri into the ambulance. Vesper watched from 10 feet away, her arms crossed, her eyes tracking every movement. As they lifted the gurney, his wrist shifted. The watch caught the light. Now the same watch, the same model, the kind issued to Russian special forces, the kind that survived things ordinary watches did not. The ambulance doors closed. The vehicle pulled away. Vesper stood in the road surrounded by wreckage and blood and the organized chaos of 22 casualties being stabilized and transported. Around her, people were moving, working, saving lives. But she was frozen, locked in place by the impossibility of what she had just seen. Scout appeared at her elbow. Are you okay? Vesper did not look at her. I'm fine. You don't look fine. You look like you've seen a ghost. The words hung in the air. Scout meant them as a figure of speech, but they were more accurate than she knew. Vesper had seen a ghost who was supposed to be buried in an unmarked grave somewhere in the Caucasus. A ghost who had betrayed her, who had killed her soldiers, who had disappeared into the machinery of witness protection while she had burned her life to the ground and started over. 8 times, 8 towns, 8 names, 8 fresh starts, and he had been here the whole time, 3 years, living 12 miles away, shopping at the same grocery store, breathing the same air. Atticus approached again. He did not speak. He just stood beside her, waiting. Finally, she turned to him. Her voice was quiet, controlled. The helicopter crash in Kabul. August 2021. You said you were at the memorial. I was. How many names were on the wall? 15. His eyes searched her face. Do you remember them? Some of them. Do you remember mine? He studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded once. Master Sergeant Vesper Crane, 161st Special Operations Aviation Regiment, killed in action with her team. No survivors. She looked back at the road, at the space where the ambulance had been, at the broken bridge and the scattered logs and the 22 lives that had almost ended on a Tuesday afternoon in February. But I'm still here. Her words were barely audible. So I see. Atticus waited. Then, who was he? The man in the ambulance. Someone from before. Before what? Before I died. She walked back to her truck without another word. Her hands found the door handle, opened it, slid inside. She sat behind the wheel and stared at the locked metal case bolted under the seat. The case she checked twice a year. The case that held 3 passports and a satellite phone and enough cash to disappear. She had 32,000 more in the go bag at the clinic. She could be gone in 2 hours, on the road in 3, across state lines by midnight, a new town, a new name, number 9. But her hands did not reach for the case. They gripped the steering wheel instead, tight enough that her knuckles went white. She was tired of running, and Dmitry Orlov was supposed to be dead. If you have ever worked beside someone and realized you never truly knew them, share your story in the comments. And if these kinds of untold truths resonate with you, I would be honored if you subscribed. Ridgemont Community Hospital sat on 12 acres of cleared land at the north end of the valley. The building was 3 stories of beige brick and dark glass, a structure built in 1994 when federal grants were abundant and county boards were optimistic about rural health care. The emergency department entrance glowed bright under sodium lights as Vesper pulled into the parking lot at 6:17 p.m. She had not gone home after the accident. She had driven directly here, following the ambulances, her hands steady on the wheel and her mind calculating probabilities. The chance that Dmitry Orlov would wake up and recognize her. The chance that federal handlers were already monitoring his medical care. The chance that someone in this building had already made a phone call that would end her 7th year in Ridgemont the same way the previous 7 towns had ended. The trauma bay was organized chaos. 22 casualties had overwhelmed the small hospital's capacity. Nurses moved between gurneys. Doctors shouted orders. The air smelled like antiseptic and blood, and the particular kind of fear that comes from too many emergencies arriving at once. Dmitry was in Bay 4, unconscious, stable. A monitor beeped his heart rate in steady rhythm. Vesper stood outside the glass partition and watched him through the transparent barrier. His face was the same, older, lines around the eyes, gray threading through his hair at the temples, but the same. She had last seen this face in a briefing room in Kandahar. September 2017. He had been wearing a suit that fit too well for someone claiming to be a mid-level logistics contractor. His English had been perfect. His cover story had been airtight. And 3 days later, Martinez and Hopkins were dead in an irrigation ditch with bullets in their backs. The dog tags under her scrub top felt heavier than usual. She touched them through the fabric. Martinez, Hopkins. 2 names she carried because their families had received folded flags and the bodies had come home in boxes, and she had stood at attention in dress uniform and saluted caskets, knowing that the man responsible was protected by witness agreements and federal handlers. You going to stand there all night, or you going to tell me what's going on? Atticus stood 3 feet behind her. She had not heard him approach. That bothered her. 7 years ago, she would have heard him from 20 feet away. 7 years of civilian life had dulled edges she could not afford to lose. She did not turn around, just checking on a patient. That's not what it looked like at the accident scene. His voice was quiet, controlled. At the voice of someone who had been in enough classified briefings to know when things were not adding up. You looked at him like you'd seen a dead man walking. People can look familiar. He's not familiar to you. He's specific. Atticus moved to stand beside her. His arms were crossed. His eyes were on Dmitry's unconscious form. Who is he? I told you. Someone from before. Before you died? The words hung in the air between them. Vesper's jaw tightened, but she did not respond. Atticus continued. I flew support for your unit. 3 missions. Helmand Province, 2016. You pulled a team out of a hot LZ under fire. Covered the extraction yourself with an M4 while your medics loaded wounded. I remember thinking no medic should move like that. No medic should shoot like that. I did my job. Your job was Special Activities Division, wasn't it? Not just Army, not just 160th EUC. It recruited you for something else. She turned to face him then. Her eyes were cold. This conversation is over. Master Sergeant Crane. He said her rank like he was calling her to attention. I was at your memorial. I saw your mother cry over a casket that had sandbags in it because there wasn't enough of you left to send home. And now you're here, alive, working in a clinic in the middle of nowhere under a name that's probably not even real. So no, this conversation is not over. The monitor in Bay 4 continued its steady beep. Dmitry's chest rose and fell. Somewhere down the hall, a doctor was calling for portable X-ray. The hospital sounds continued around them, indifferent to the confrontation. Vesper's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. If you were at my memorial, then you know I'm dead. Keep it that way. Why? Because the alternative gets people killed. She walked away before he could respond. Her boots made no sound on the linoleum. She moved through the emergency department like a ghost, past nurses who did not look up, past patients who did not see her. At the end of the hallway was a bathroom, single occupancy. She locked the door behind her. The fluorescent light hummed overhead. She gripped the edge of the sink and stared at her reflection, the same face she had seen for 42 years. But the eyes were different, harder, older, the eyes of someone who had done things that left marks in places mirrors could not show. She counted her breathing, in for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. The technique they had taught her at the farm before the first deployment, and the technique that kept hands steady during surgery and voices calm during interrogations and bodies still during sniper hides. A sound cut through her focus, distant, rhythmic. helicopter rotors. Her hands tightened on the sink. The porcelain was cold under her palms. The sound grew louder. Medical helicopter. Incoming trauma. Routine. Normal. But her heart rate had spiked and her breathing had shortened, and she was back in Kabul with fire in the sky and screaming in her headset and the smell of burning fuel. She touched the dog tags again, counted the letters with her thumb. Martinez, Hopkins. The engraving was worn smooth from years of this exact motion. The helicopter sound faded. She released the sink, washed her hands, dried them, checked her reflection one more time to make sure the mask was back in place. And then she unlocked the door and returned to the emergency department. 3 men in dark suits were standing at the nurses' station, federal agents. The badges on their belts said FBI, but their posture said something else, something more specialized. They were talking to the charge nurse, asking questions, taking notes. Vesper turned and walked the opposite direction. Not running, just moving with purpose. She took the stairs to the second floor, then the service elevator to the ground level. The exit led to the loading dock. She was halfway to her truck when a voice stopped her. Master Sergeant Volkov. Not Crane. Volkov. Her real name. The name she had not used in 7 years. She stopped walking, but did not turn around. The voice belonged to one of the men from the nurses' station. Mid-40s, graying hair. Eyes that tracked movement with tactical precision. My name is Morrison, FBI. We need to talk. No, we don't. It's about the man in Bay 4. Dmitry Orlov. I think you know who he is. She turned slowly. Morrison stood 10 feet away, alone. His hands were visible and empty. Not a threat. Not yet. I know him. Her voice was flat. We know. Morrison pulled a tablet from his jacket, pulled up a photograph. Surveillance footage from the accident scene. Vesper kneeling beside Dmitry. Her face frozen in recognition. The image was time-stamped and geotagged and would hold up in any court in the country. How long have you known he was here? I didn't. Not until today. 7 years. Morrison studied her. You've been in Ridgemont 7 years. He's been here 3. Both of you in witness protection. Both of you hiding. And neither of you knew. And it wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. No. That's a hell of a coincidence. There's no such thing as coincidence. Only information you don't have yet. Morrison almost smiled. That sounds like something an intelligence officer would say. I'm a nurse. You were a lot of things. He swiped to another image. Military personnel file, her face, younger, harder, wearing a CU pattern with 160 T8 SOAR insignia. Master Sergeant Anastasia Volkov, Special Operations Aviation Regiment, killed in action, Kabul, August 2021. That's classified. It was. Until Dmitry Orlov woke up an hour ago and asked the nurse if Anastasia survived the accident. Vesper's expression did not change, but something shifted behind her eyes. He's awake? Sedated now, but conscious long enough to confirm what we suspected. Morrison pocketed the tablet. There are contracts on 15 people who worked your last operation. 12 are dead. You're number 13. And Dmitry is the man who sold them all out. I know what he did. Then you know he's been cooperating with federal prosecutors for 6 years. Witness protection in exchange for testimony against GRU networks in the Western Hemisphere. Morrison paused. You know what I can't figure out? How you ended up in the same town. Ask your handlers. They're the ones who placed him. We didn't place you. Number. She met his eyes. I placed myself. The scanner on Morrison's belt crackled. All units, flash flood warning. Dam failure at Whiskey Creek Reservoir. Lower Ridgemont evacuating. All emergency personnel respond. Morrison silenced the radio. We're not done here. Yes, we are. Vesper was already moving toward her truck. People are about to drown. She did not wait for permission. She climbed into the truck, started the engine, and drove out of the parking lot while Morrison stood in the loading dock and watched her go. Route 14 South was chaos. Cars heading north in both lanes. Families evacuating. Sheriff Huck's deputies trying to direct traffic with limited success. The rain had started 20 minutes ago and was coming down hard enough to overwhelm the windshield wipers. Vesper drove against traffic on the shoulder, her emergency flashers on, her hand on the horn. The truck had 4-wheel drive and enough clearance to handle the flooding that was already covering low sections of road. At mile marker 8, the water was 6 inches deep. At mile marker 5, it was a foot. The radio crackled. All medical to Sunset Pines assisted living. Facility flooding. Residents trapped on second floor need immediate evacuation. She grabbed the microphone. Vesper Crane responding. ETA 4 minutes. Roger that, Vesper. Sheriff Huck's voice. We've got boats inbound, but not enough. You trained for water rescue? No. The lie came automatically. But the truth was complicated. She had trained for every kind of rescue. Land, air, water, urban, wilderness. The kind of training that came with a different job title than rural clinic nurse. Sunset Pines was a single-story structure that had been built on a floodplain because the land was cheap. The structure was brick, solid, but the foundation was 8 inches below current water level, and the water was still rising. Sheriff Huck met her at the entrance. His uniform was soaked. His radio was in a waterproof case. 40 residents, half are mobility impaired. We're loading them into boats as fast as we can, but we've got a problem. What kind of problem? Woman in labor, second floor. Can't move her. Scout appeared around the corner carrying an emergency medical kit. She had arrived before Vesper. Her eyes were wide, but her hands were steady. I've been with her for 10 minutes. Contractions are 4 minutes apart. We don't have time to transport. Vesper looked at the water level, then at the second floor windows, then at Scout. Do you have delivery supplies? Basic. Scout held up the kit. But I've never delivered a baby. You're about to learn. They took the stairs. The water had reached the 3rd step and was climbing. The second floor was dry, but the smell of mold and dampness was already settling in. The woman in labor was named Caroline. She was 28, first pregnancy, terrified. Vesper knelt beside the bed and checked vitals. Blood pressure elevated. Heart rate fast but steady. Contractions strong and regular. The baby was coming whether they were ready or not. Scout. Vesper's voice was calm, absolutely calm. The kind of calm that came from delivering babies in places much worse than a flooding assisted living facility. Improvise a delivery kit. Shoelaces for umbilical ties. Plastic bags for sterile field. Towels for warming. How do you know what we need? Just do it. Scout moved. Vesper stayed with Caroline, talking her through breathing, monitoring contractions, preparing for complications that might require field interventions she was not supposed to know how to perform. The delivery took 40 minutes, no complications. A healthy girl, 7 pounds, strong lungs. Vesper tied off the cord with shoelaces, wrapped the baby in towels, placed her on Caroline's chest. Scout stood against the wall, shaking. Where did you learn to do that? Scout's voice was barely steady. Vesper was washing the newborn with bottled water. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency. Twice in Syria, once in Yemen. The words were out before she realized what she had said. Scout's eyes widened. What? Vesper froze. The water bottle was still in her hand. The baby was clean and crying and alive, and she had just told an 18-year-old nursing student that she had delivered babies in war zones. I read about it. Medical journals. You said Syria. You said Yemen. Those aren't journals. Scout. Vesper's voice was harder now. We need to evacuate. The water is still rising. But Scout was not moving. She was staring at Vesper like she was seeing her for the first time. All those things in my notebook, the things that don't make sense. You're not just a nurse, are you? We don't have time for this conversation. When do we have time? Scout's voice was rising. 7 years I've watched you. 7 years you've been perfect. Never a mistake. Never a hesitation. But you freeze at helicopter sounds. You speak Russian when you're focused. You know things you shouldn't know. Who are you? Vesper stood, picked up the medical kit, headed for the door. Get the mother and baby to a boat. I'll check the other rooms. She left before Scout could respond, moved down the hallway, checking each room, verifying evacuation. Most were empty. At the end of the hall, one door was still closed. She opened it. An elderly man sat in a wheelchair, facing the window. He did not turn when she entered. Sir, we need to evacuate. He still did not turn. The boats are here. That's right. Let me help you. She moved to the wheelchair, began to release the brake. Then she saw movement in the parking lot below, a boat approaching. Not rescue services. Private vessel. 2 men, moving with coordinated precision. Military formation. Her hand stopped on the brake. She stepped to the window, watched. The men moved wrong, too tactical, too aware. One scanned the building while the other secured the boat. Both wore civilian clothes, but their posture was trained, professional. She recognized the movement patterns. Spetsnaz. Russian Special Forces. Her hand went to her waistband where she used to carry a sidearm. Nothing there. She had not carried a weapon in 7 years. Suddenly that felt like a mistake. The men entered the building through the ground floor. She could hear them on the stairs, speaking Russian. Low voices, coordinating. Vesper grabbed the wheelchair and pushed the elderly man toward the door. Her movements were fast now, efficient. The old man protested, but she ignored him. Got him into the hallway. Flagged down a volunteer. Get him to a boat. Now. The volunteer took the wheelchair. Vesper moved the opposite direction, toward the stairs, toward the men who should not be here. They met on the landing. 2 men, both in their 30s, both with the hard eyes of people who had done things that kept them awake at night. The lead man saw her and smiled. Nurse Crane. His English was good, but the accent was there. We are here to help with evacuation. No, you're not. And she moved before he could respond. 2 steps. Disarm. Redirect. The pistol was out of his hand and in hers in less than 2 seconds. The muscle memory was automatic. Brutal. Exactly the way they had trained her 15 years ago. The second man reached for his weapon. She had the gun pointed at his forehead before his hand touched the grip. Don't. He froze. The first man was on the ground, his wrist at an angle that would require medical attention. He was cursing in Russian. She answered in the same language, fluid, native, the accent of someone who had learned the language before English. How many? He did not answer. She adjusted her aim, put the barrel against his kneecap. How many? 9. His voice was strained. Wagner Group. Contract. On who? You know who. Where's the boy? What boy? Ender Volkov. Where is he? The man's eyes flickered. Just for a second. But it was enough. He's leverage. The man's smile was ugly. You want him back, you turn yourself in. Footsteps on the stairs. Heavy. Fast. Sheriff Huck appeared with his service weapon drawn. He saw Vesper holding the Russian pistol, saw the man on the ground, saw the second man with his hands raised. What in the hell is going on? Vesper did not lower the weapon. These men are not rescue volunteers. Huck's eyes went to the pistol in her hand, to the way she held it. Professional. Practiced. The grip of someone who had fired thousands of rounds. Where did you learn to do that? She did not answer. She was searching the first man's pockets. Found a phone, waterproof case, encrypted. She pocketed it. Sheriff, these men are armed. They're not here to help. They're here for me. Huck's weapon stayed trained on the second man. Who are you? The man smiled but said nothing. Vesper stood, handed the Russian pistol to Huck. Spetsnaz. Wagner Group. Private military contractors. They work for people who want me dead. Huck's face went pale. This is Tennessee, not Afghanistan. Tell them that. She moved toward the stairs. We need to secure the building and get everyone out. Now. The evacuation took another hour. By the time the last resident was in a boat, the water had reached the 2nd floor. Federal agents had arrived. Morrison was among them. He stood on the parking lot while Vesper gave her statement to a deputy, his eyes tracking her every movement. When the deputy finished, Morrison approached. We need to talk. For real this time. She was exhausted, soaked. Her scrubs were stained with blood and mud, and the residue of emergency medicine performed in impossible conditions. Fine. They sat in Morrison's vehicle, a black SUV with tinted windows and enough radio equipment to coordinate a small war. He pulled out the tablet again, opened a file. This time the photographs were different. Surveillance, tactical positions, a compound somewhere in the Caucasus Mountains. This is you. Morrison pointed to a figure in tactical gear. Chechnya, 2014. CIA Special Activities Division. You weren't just a medic. You were an operator. She said nothing. He swiped to the next image. Syria, 2015. You led a team that extracted a high-value target from ISIS territory. 3 of you went in, 5 came out. The 2 extras were CIA assets who would have been executed if you hadn't pulled them. What's your point? My point is, you're not some scared witness hiding from her past. You're a trained intelligence officer with a body count that's probably classified at levels I don't have clearance for. Morrison leaned back. So why are you pretending to be a small-town nurse? Because I'm tired of killing people. The words hung in the air. Morrison studied her face, looking for the lie. But there was no lie. Dmitry Orlov betrayed your unit in 2017. 2 soldiers died. You spent 4 years hunting the network responsible. Then the Kabul operation went wrong and 15 people ended up with contracts on their heads. Morrison paused. 12 are dead. The other 3 are you, Dmitry, and a signals intelligence officer named Chen, who disappeared into Malaysia 2 years ago. His name is Ender, not Chen, and he's 15 years old and he's my son. Morrison's expression changed. What? The third target? Vesper's voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. His real name is Ender Volkov. He's my son. I gave him up 6 years ago when the contracts went active. Put him with a family in London. Changed his name. Changed his records. Kept him safe. Morrison was scrolling through files on the tablet. His fingers moved fast. There's no record of you having a child. That was the point. She leaned forward. The men at the assisted living facility said they have him. That means someone in your organization leaked his location. So either you fix this or I fix it myself. You can't go after Wagner Group alone. Watch me. Morrison's radio crackled. Agent Morrison, you need to come to the hospital. The witness is awake and asking for Anastasia. Vesper was out of the vehicle before Morrison could respond. She was in her truck and driving before he could stop her. Ridgemont Community Hospital was quieter now. The emergency rush had passed. Most casualties had been stabilized or transferred. The ICU was on the 3rd floor. Dmitry was in a private room. 2 federal agents stood outside the door. They moved to stop her, but Morrison's voice came through their radios. Let her in. The room was dim. Monitors beeped. IV lines dripped. Dmitry lay in the bed, his face pale, his eyes open. He smiled when he saw her. Anastasia. Still alive. She closed the door behind her, stood at the foot of the bed. Her hands were in her pockets. Her face was expressionless, for now. You sold us out. Her voice was quiet. Martinez and Hopkins are dead because of you. They were in the wrong place at the wrong time. They were my soldiers. Dmitry's smile widened. And you were CIA, playing soldier, playing medic, but really hunting men like me, men who betray their units, men who survive. She moved closer to the bed. Her hands came out of her pockets, empty, but the threat was clear. Where's my son? He's safe. For now. Where? Dmitry coughed, winced. The painkillers are wearing off. Maybe you could ask the nurse for more. Where is Ender? The people I work for were very interested when I told them about the quiet nurse in Ridgemont. The one who speaks Russian when she's focused. The one who moves like an operator. They put resources into finding out who you really were. His eyes were bright with fever or drugs or malice. Imagine their surprise when they found out you had a son. Vesper's hand was on his IV line. One pull and the morphine would stop. Where is he? Safe, like I said. As long as you cooperate. What do you want? Me? Nothing. I'm in witness protection. I'm protected. But the people who want you dead, they want you to turn yourself in. Trade. You for the boy. She studied his face. The same face that had smiled in the briefing room in Kandahar. The same face that had condemned 2 soldiers to death. The same face that was now using her son as leverage. The dog tags under her scrub top felt like they weighed 100 pounds. She touched them through the fabric. Martinez, Hopkins, 2 names she carried, 2 lives that ended because of the man in this bed. Dmitry saw the gesture. You still wear them? Sentimental. I wear them so I remember. Remember what? Why I'm still alive. Dmitry pulled out his phone. And hospital staff had given it back. Security hazard, but he was a protected witness. Rules bent for people like him. He pulled up a photo, showed it to her. A teenage boy, 15 years old, steel gray eyes, her eyes, standing outside a school. The photo was recent, taken yesterday. Surveillance quality. Ender, her son, the child she had given up to keep safe. The one person in the world who mattered more than missions or contracts or revenge. The door opened. Morrison entered with 2 more agents. Behind them was someone else. A woman in a suit. DOJ. She had the look of someone who spent her life in courtrooms and classified briefings. Miss Volkov. The woman's voice was formal. I'm Deputy Director Sarah Chen, Department of Justice. We need to discuss your situation. Vesper did not take her eyes off Dmitry. My situation is that Wagner Group has my son. We're aware. Chen sat down. Which is why we need your full cooperation. Everything you know about the network, every operation, every name. In exchange for what? We protect your son. Full immunity for you. New identity. Relocation. I've relocated 8 times. They found me every time. Because you were doing it alone. Chen leaned forward. This time you work with us. Full protection. Federal resources. Your son gets moved to a secure facility. You testify. Wagner Group gets dismantled. Everyone wins. Except the people who die while you're processing paperwork. Vesper's voice was hard. I know how this works. I know how long investigations take. My son doesn't have that kind of time. Morrison spoke up. We can move fast. Not fast enough. Then what do you suggest? Vesper looked at Dmitri, and then at the federal agents. Then at the window where the lights of Ridgemont spread across the valley like scattered stars. 8 towns, 8 names. 8 times she had run. 8 times she had built a life and watched it burn. She was tired of running. She turned to Morrison. How long until they come, for you or for the town? Both. Morrison checked his phone. We've increased security. Hospital is locked down. Local law enforcement is on alert. Federal assets are mobilizing. That's not what I asked. Morrison met her eyes. They're already positioning. We've identified 3 vehicles, 9 operators, Wagner Group standard team configuration. They'll hit when they think they have the advantage. Vesper looked at the clock on the wall. 11:47 p.m. The middle of the night was when operators moved. Yet when vision was compromised and response times were slow and mistakes got made, she looked at Scout standing in the hallway watching through the window, at Holden arriving with coffee and questions, at Atticus leaning against the wall with the posture of someone who had been in firefights and knew when another one was coming, at this town, these people, this life she had built on lies and half-truths and a name that was not hers. Morrison's radio crackled. All units be advised. 3 vehicles just entered Ridgemont town limits, moving slow, tactical formation. Vesper met Morrison's eyes. Her voice was steady. How long? He checked the tactical display on his tablet. 20 minutes, maybe less. She looked at Dmitri one more time, and then at the federal agents who thought paperwork and protocols would solve problems that required different solutions. I need to make a phone call. To who? People who can help. Morrison shook his head. No outside contact. This is a federal operation now. Then you better work fast. Because those 9 operators aren't coming for me. She moved toward the door. They're coming for everyone who's seen my face. Everyone who knows I'm here. That's not just me. That's this entire hospital, this entire town. We can evacuate. Not in 20 minutes you can't. Chen stood. What are you proposing? Vesper stopped at the door. Her hand was on the handle. Her eyes were cold, hard. The eyes of someone who had made decisions that cost lives and saved lives and kept her awake at night. I'm proposing we stop running. She pulled open the door. And we make them come to us. The hallway was quiet. Hospital staff moved between rooms. Patients slept. Monitors beeped. Normal sounds, normal rhythms. But underneath it all was tension. The kind of tension that came before violence. Scout appeared at her elbow. Vesper, what's happening? Vesper looked at her. At this 18-year-old girl who had spent 6 months following her around, taking notes, asking questions. Who had seen things today that did not fit? Who deserved truth? You asked me who I am. Yes. My name is Anastasia Volkov. I was born in Moscow. I joined the army at 19. CIA recruited me at 23. I spent years doing things I can't talk about in places that don't officially exist. She paused. And the people coming for me will kill everyone in this building if they think it will flush me out. Scout's face went pale. So what do? We get everyone to safety, then we prepare. For what? War. Morrison appeared in the hallway. His phone was pressed to his ear. His face was grim. He ended the call and looked at Vesper. Hostage rescue team is inbound. ETA 40 minutes. Too long. I know. Where are the Wagner vehicles now? 2 just parked at the elementary school, 1 at the fire station. They're staging. Smart. She was already moving toward the stairs. Triangulated positions, multiple approach vectors. They're setting up a perimeter before the assault. How do you know their tactics? Because I trained with the people who trained them. She reached the stairwell. Morrison followed. Behind them, federal agents were mobilizing. Radio chatter increased. The hospital security started locking doors. Vesper descended the stairs 2 at a time. And her mind was calculating. 9 operators, professional, equipped, coordinated, against a rural hospital with minimal security and no tactical capabilities. The odds were bad, but she had survived worse. At the ground floor, she pushed through the exit. The parking lot was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that came before violence. Morrison stood beside her. His hand was on his sidearm. They're out there. I know. Can you feel them? I can always feel them. The night air was cold. Rain had stopped, but the pavement was still wet. Streetlights reflected in puddles. In the distance, a car engine started. Then another. Not random. Coordinated. Morrison's radio crackled. All units, vehicles are moving. Converging on hospital. Vesper's hand went to her waistband. Still no weapon. Still nothing but muscle memory and training and the absolute certainty that the next 20 minutes would determine whether everyone in this building lived or died. She looked at Morrison. Get everyone to the center of the building, away from windows. Lock down all entrances except the main ER. That's where they'll come. You're setting up a kill box. I'm setting up a choke point. There's a difference. What's the difference? In a kill box, everyone dies. In a choke point, we control who dies. Morrison stared at her. Then he nodded, grabbed his radio, started issuing orders. Vesper turned back to the parking lot. The vehicles were closer now. Headlights off, moving slow, professional. Scout appeared beside her again. This girl who would not leave. This girl who had spent half a year learning everything Vesper could teach about medicine and nothing about survival. You should go inside. Scout shook her head. No, this isn't your fight. You made it my fight when you delivered that baby, when you showed me what real medicine looks like. Scout's voice was steady. I'm staying. Vesper looked at her. At this girl who should run but was choosing to stand. At this girl who deserved better than to die in a hospital parking lot because she had the bad luck to work with a ghost. Fine. But you do exactly what I say. No arguments. No hesitation. Okay. The vehicles were in the parking lot now. 3 of them. SUVs dark. Nondescript. They parked in formation. Doors opened. Men emerged. 9 of them. Moving with tactical precision. They wore civilian clothes, but their movements were military. Professional. Lethal. The lead man stepped forward, stopped 20 feet from the entrance. He was looking directly at Vesper, smiling. He spoke in Russian. Anastasia Volkov. We've been looking for you. She answered in the same language. You found me. Will you come quietly? No. He nodded. As expected. His hand moved. A signal. The other 8 operators began to spread out. Flanking positions. Covering fire lanes. Setting up for a breach. Vesper's mind was calculating. Distance. Angles. Cover. Weapon positions. Everything she had been trained to assess. Everything she had tried to forget for 7 years. Morrison was beside her again. Hostage rescue is 30 minutes out. Too long. I know. She looked at him. At Scout. At Atticus, who had appeared from somewhere. At Holden standing in the doorway. And at the people who had worked beside her for 7 years without knowing who she really was. And she made a decision. She stepped forward. Into the parking lot. Into the open. Her hands were visible. Empty. No threat. The lead operator smiled wider. Smart choice. Behind her, Morrison hissed. What are you doing? Buying time. She walked toward the Wagner team. Her steps were steady, controlled. She stopped 10 feet from the lead man, close enough to talk, far enough to react. Let the hospital go. You want me. Here I am. The man studied her. We want you alive. For questioning. About what? Names, operations, locations, the usual. I don't know anything anymore. I've been a nurse for 7 years. He laughed. You've been hiding for 7 years. There's a difference. She glanced at the other operators. They were in position now. Weapons ready. Professional spacing. Overlapping fields of fire. If shooting started, the hospital would become a war zone. My son. Where is he? Safe. Like we promised. Prove it. He pulled out his phone. Showed her a live video feed. Ender. Alive. Sitting in a room. Reading a book. Unharmed. The relief was physical. Painful. She had not seen his face in 6 years. He had grown. Taller. His features sharper. But his eyes were the same. Her eyes. Let him go. Give us what we want, and we will. What do you want? The man leaned closer. We want you to stop pretending to be dead. We want you to answer for what you did. We want justice. Justice. The word tasted bitter. For who? For the men you killed. For the operations you destroyed. For the networks you dismantled. I was doing my job. So are we. Behind them, sirens began to wail. Police. Fire. Federal response. The cavalry was coming. Too late to prevent violence, but fast enough to respond to it. The lead operator's smile faded. Out of time. He raised his hand. Another signal. Vesper moved. If those of you watching have ever had to choose between who you were and who you became, leave your thoughts below. And if stories of impossible choices resonate with you, your subscription would mean more than you know. Vesper moved. Not toward the operator. Backward. 3 steps that put her behind the concrete pillar at the hospital entrance. The movement was fluid, automatic, exactly what 15 years of training had programmed into muscle memory. The lead operator's hand was still raised, still signaling. But Vesper was already gone from the kill zone, and Morrison had his weapon drawn, and Atticus was pulling Scout behind cover, and the moment hung suspended between violence and negotiation. Then headlights flooded the parking lot. Not police, not federal response. A convoy of civilian vehicles, trucks, SUVs, farm equipment. They poured into the lot from 3 directions and formed a loose perimeter around the Wagner operators. Doors opened. People emerged. Not operators, not soldiers. Farmers, teachers, shopkeepers. The people of Ridgemont, armed with hunting rifles and shotguns, and the kind of quiet determination that came from protecting home. Sheriff Huck stepped out of his patrol vehicle. His weapon was holstered, his hands were visible, but 15 deputies stood behind him with rifles ready. The lead Wagner operator lowered his hand, and his smile was gone. This is not your concern, Sheriff. Everything that happens in my county is my concern. Huck's voice was steady. And you're trespassing on hospital property with weapons and what looks like intent to harm. We're here for one person. The rest of you can leave. Nobody's leaving. The voice came from the crowd. Dr. Holden Merrick stepped forward. His white coat was rumpled as always, but his eyes were hard. This woman has worked beside me for 7 years, saved more lives than I can count. Whatever she did before she came here doesn't change that. You don't know what she did. The operator's voice was cold. Don't care. Holden moved to stand beside Vesper. She's one of us. More voices joined. Bryony Marsh, the nurses from the clinic, patients Vesper had treated, families whose children she had saved. One by one they stepped forward, creating a human wall between Vesper and the operators. The lead operator looked at his team, at the armed civilians, at the federal agents arriving in tactical vehicles, at the situation that had shifted from simple extraction to potential massacre. His radio crackled. Russian voices, orders from somewhere else, someone watching, someone calculating. He looked at Vesper one more time. This isn't over, I know. The operators withdrew, smooth, professional. They loaded into their vehicles and drove out of the parking lot in formation. Not retreating, repositioning. Vesper knew the difference. Morrison was beside her immediately. They'll be back. I know. We need to get you somewhere secure. No. She looked at the people still standing in the parking lot, at the town that had formed a perimeter around her without being asked, at the community she had lived beside for 7 years without truly joining. We need to tell them the truth. That's not protocol. Protocol hasn't worked. She met his eyes. They deserve to know who they just protected. 2 hours later, Ridgemont Community Center was filled beyond capacity. 200 people crowded into a space designed for half that number. They sat in folding chairs and stood along the walls and spilled out into the hallway. The murmur of conversation was low, tense, uncertain. Sheriff Huck stood at the front. Beside him was Morrison. Beside Morrison was Vesper. She stood with her hands clasped in front of her. Her face was expressionless, but her eyes tracked the room. Every exit, every face, every potential threat. And Huck raised his hand and the room fell silent. You all deserve to know what's happening. Why armed men showed up at our hospital. Why federal agents are in our town. He gestured to Vesper. And who this woman really is. Vesper stepped forward. The silence was absolute. 200 people watching, waiting. She had briefed combat units before drops. had given testimony in classified hearings, had spoken to rooms full of people who held security clearances and carried weapons and understood the weight of secrets. This was harder. My name is not Vesper Crane. The words hung in the air. Simple, direct, irreversible. My name is Anastasia Volkov. I was born in Moscow in 1982. My parents were journalists. They wrote about corruption, about abuse of power, about truth. She paused. The FSB executed them when I was 8 years old. Shot them in the street outside our apartment. I watched from the window. The room was absolutely still. An American family adopted me, gave me a new name, a new country, a new chance. I joined the army at 19, not for patriotism, for revenge. Her voice was steady, clinical, the recitation of facts without emotion. At 23, the CIA recruited me, Special Activities Division, the people who do things that don't officially happen in places that don't officially exist. She could see the reactions: shock, disbelief, recognition. Scout was crying. Holden looked stunned. Bryony's mouth was open. I spent 5 years hunting the men who killed my parents. I found them. All of them. She did not elaborate, did not need to. The silence said enough. My last official mission was supposed to be a rescue operation in Afghanistan. It wasn't. And it was an assassination disguised as humanitarian work. 15 people knew the truth. The helicopter crash in Kabul was staged. Officially, I died. Unofficially, I disappeared. She touched the dog tags under her shirt, pulled them out for the first time in 7 years, let them hang visible against her scrubs. These belonged to Corporal Daniel Martinez and Specialist Sarah Hopkins. They were my soldiers. They died in 2017 because a man named Dmitry Orlov sold intelligence to enemy forces. I wear their names because I never want to forget what betrayal costs. The dog tags caught the fluorescent light, stamped metal, worn smooth. 2 lives reduced to engraved letters. After Kabul, contracts went out on everyone involved in that operation. 12 are dead. I've been running for 7 years. 8 towns, 8 names. 8 times I've tried to disappear. She looked around the room. Ridgemont was supposed to be number 8. Huck spoke up. And the man in the hospital? Dmitry Orlov? He's been in federal witness protection here for 3 years. We didn't know about each other, not until the accident. She paused. The people who want me dead found out he was here. Found out I was here. They're using him to draw me out. Why? Someone called from the crowd. Why do they want you dead? Because I know things. Because I did things. Because dead witnesses can't testify. Her voice hardened. And because I have a 15-year-old son that I gave up 6 years ago to keep him safe. They have him now. They're using him as leverage. The room erupted. Questions, objections, fear, anger. Huck raised his hand for silence, but it took a full minute for the noise to settle. An elderly man stood. Harold Pickens, retired schoolteacher. Vesper had treated his diabetes for 5 years. You saved my grandson's life 2 years ago. Allergic reaction. You knew exactly what to do. Didn't hesitate. He looked around the room. I don't care what name she uses. I don't care what she did before. She's been nothing but good to this town. Others nodded. More stood. A woman whose difficult pregnancy Vesper had managed. A farmer whose hand she had reattached after a combine accident. A child she had pulled from a flooded car 3 years ago. One by one they stood. Not speaking. Just standing. A silent vote. Recognition without words. Vesper's throat tightened. She had planned this speech. Rehearsed the facts. Prepared for questions. But she had not prepared for acceptance. Morrison stepped forward. And the people who are after her are professional military contractors. Wagner Group, 9 operators currently positioned around Ridgemont. Our hostage rescue team is 40 minutes out. We're evacuating the town. No. The voice was Vesper's. Morrison turned to stare at her. We're not evacuating. She met his eyes. These people stood in a parking lot tonight to protect me. I'm not going to thank them by turning their town into a war zone while they run. Then what do you suggest? We make them come to us. On our terms. On our ground. She looked at Huck. How many people in this town have military or law enforcement experience? Huck pulled out his phone. Checked a database. 43 veterans. 15 active or retired law enforcement, 22 hunters with advanced marksmanship scores. Good. She moved to the wall where a map of Ridgemont hung. Tactical positions. Overlapping fields of fire. Force multiplication through terrain advantage. Morrison, where are the Wagner vehicles now? He checked his tablet. 2 at the elementary school, 1 at the fire station, same positions. They're establishing a perimeter before the assault. Standard doctrine. She traced routes on the map. They'll hit in the early morning, between 2 and 4 a.m. Limited visibility, minimal civilian movement, maximum confusion. How do you know? Because it's what I would do. She looked at the crowd, at the people who had lived beside her for 7 years without knowing who she was, at the people who were choosing to stand with her now that they did know. We have 8 hours. That's enough time to prepare. For what? To turn Ridgemont into a fortress. The next 8 hours moved with military precision. Vesper divided the volunteers into teams, defensive positions, communications, medical, logistics. She moved through the groups giving instructions, weapon placement, fields of fire, fallback positions. The language of combat came naturally after 7 years of suppression. Atticus worked beside her, his Marine Corps training integrating seamlessly with her operational experience. They turned the hospital into a strong point, the clinic into a medical station, the community center into a command post. Scout followed with her notebook, writing everything down, learning, always learning. Vesper showed her how to set up casualty collection points, how to triage under fire, how to manage mass casualties with limited resources. This isn't nursing school. No. Vesper was marking positions on a map. This is what nursing looks like when the world breaks. Pay attention. By midnight, the preparations were complete. Defensive positions manned, communications tested, medical supplies staged. The town was quiet, waiting. Vesper stood in the community center looking at the tactical display. Morrison was coordinating with federal response teams. Huck was checking on his deputies. The volunteers were in position. Everything was ready, except her. She found a quiet corner, pulled out her phone, the encrypted one from her go bag, dialed a number she had not called in 6 years. It rang 4 times. Then a voice answered. Familiar, young, uncertain. Hello? Her throat closed. 6 years. 6 years since she had heard his voice, since she had held him, since she had been his mother instead of a ghost protecting him from a distance. Ender. Her voice cracked. Just slightly. Just enough. Mom? The word broke something inside her. Not Ice Queen. Not Master Sergeant Volkov. Not Anastasia the operator or Vesper the nurse. Just Mom. I'm here. I'm coming for you. They said you would. His voice was steady, braver than any 15-year-old should have to be. Are you okay? I will be. She closed her eyes. Are they treating you well? Yes. They're professionals. They haven't hurt me. Good. Listen carefully. Tomorrow morning this will be over. One way or another. Federal teams are moving. I need you to be ready. Ready for what? To trust me. One more time. I always trust you, Mom. Even when you were gone, I knew you were keeping me safe. The tears came then, silent. She did not wipe them away, just let them fall while her son's voice told her things she needed to hear and did not deserve. I love you. I love you too. Come home. The line went dead. She sat in the dark corner with the phone in her hand and let herself break. Just for a moment, just long enough to remember why she was doing this. Then she put the phone away and stood and walked back to the tactical display with her face reset and her eyes dry and the Ice Queen restored. Morrison looked up. You okay? Fine. Where's your hostage rescue team? Staging at the county line. ETA 10 minutes, once we give the go signal. Don't give it yet. She studied the map. Let Wagner commit first. Let them think they have the advantage. Then we spring the trap. You're using the entire town as bait. I'm using myself as bait. The town is the trap. At 2:47 a.m., the scanner crackled. Movement detected. 3 vehicles approaching from different vectors. Vesper keyed her radio. All positions hold fire. Let them come. The vehicles entered Ridgemont in tactical formation, moving slow, professional. They parked at predetermined positions. The 9 operators emerged wearing night vision and carrying automatic weapons. They moved through the dark streets like ghosts. But Vesper had prepared for ghosts. The operators approached the hospital in standard breach formation. 3 at the front entrance, 3 at the emergency entrance, 3 covering. They stacked up, checked corners, communicated through hand signals. Then they breached, and found nothing. The hospital was empty. Patients evacuated, staff gone. Just empty hallways and dark rooms, and the growing realization that they had walked into something. Floodlights snapped on. Every light in Ridgemont came on at once. The operators were caught in the open, exposed. Visible! Vesper's voice came over loudspeakers. Drop your weapons! You're surrounded! The operators reacted instantly, taking cover, establishing defensive positions. But everywhere they looked, rifle barrels pointed back. From windows, from rooftops, from vehicles. Not professional soldiers, but hunters who knew how to shoot. Veterans who knew how to hold a position. Deputies who knew their town. The lead operator's voice came through his radio, clear, audible. Vesper had hacked their communications. This is a civilian population. Rules of engagement prohibit fire on non-combatants. Vesper responded from her position on the hospital roof. Then I suggest you surrender, because these civilians are protecting their home. A helicopter sound grew in the distance. Not medical, not news. Federal. And the distinctive thump of tactical insertion birds. The lead operator realized. Hostage rescue, coming fast. Vesper stepped into view on the roof. Alone, visible. You wanted me, here I am. But you're not leaving with me, and you're not leaving at all. The operators had seconds to decide. Fight their way out against armed civilians and incoming federal response. Or surrender and hope for prisoner exchange later. The math was simple. The choice was obvious. One by one they lowered their weapons, raised their hands, knelt in the hospital courtyard with floodlights turning night to day and rifle barrels tracking their every movement. FBI hostage rescue landed in the parking lot. Agents in full tactical gear rappelled down and secured the operators with practiced efficiency. Morrison coordinated the arrests, read rights, documented everything. Vesper descended from the roof, walked through the courtyard, past the operators who had come to kill her, past the civilians who had stood to protect her, to the center of the space where everything had changed. The lead operator looked up at her. His hands were zip-tied behind his back. His night vision was gone. His weapon was gone. His smile was gone. You should have run. His English was still good, still accented. She knelt down to his level, met his eyes. I did run, for 6 years. I'm done running. The boy? Safe. Federal custody. Far from here. You won. This time. No. She stood. We won. This whole town. Because that's what happens when you stop running alone. Morrison approached as the operators were loaded into armored vehicles. We got them all. 9 operators. Command and control element will be rounded up by morning. And Wagner Group's client list is about to become very public. What about my son? FBI helicopter is bringing him from the safe house. He'll be here in 20 minutes. She looked at the sky, at the stars visible now that the floodlights had dimmed, at the town of Ridgemont spread across the valley, at the people returning to their homes now that the danger had passed. What happens now? Morrison pulled out a tablet, showed her a document. Full immunity agreement. Witness protection officially terminated. New legal identity. Federal resources for protection. And in exchange, your testimony. Everything you know about the networks, the operations, the names. He paused. And Dmitry Orlov testifies too, or he goes to prison for espionage and treason. Does he know that? He will. The helicopter sound grew louder, closer. At a civilian bird with federal markings. It landed in the parking lot and the rotors began to slow. The door opened. A teenage boy stepped out. Tall, slender, steel gray eyes that reflected the floodlights. He wore jeans and a jacket and carried a backpack. He looked around the parking lot, at the tactical vehicles, at the armed agents, at the town that had become a battlefield. Then he saw her. She was running before she realized it, her training forgotten, her restraint gone. Just a mother who had not held her son in 6 years and was not going to wait one more second. They met in the middle of the parking lot. She dropped to her knees and opened her arms, and he was there, solid, real, alive. Her son. Ender buried his face in her shoulder. She held him, both of them shaking, both of them crying, both of them home. Scout watched from the hospital entrance, tears streaming down her face. Holden stood beside her with his hand on her shoulder. Atticus leaned against the wall. Even Morrison looked away. Some moments were too private for witnessing. When they finally pulled apart, Vesper kept her hands on Ender's shoulders, looking at him, memorizing his face. The boy she had last seen at 9 was now 15, taller than her, features sharper, but his eyes were the same. "I'm sorry." "Don't be." His voice was deeper than she remembered. "You kept me alive. You kept me safe. That's what matters. I should have been there. You were." He touched his chest. "Right here. Always." She pulled him close again. Behind them, Morrison was coordinating with federal teams. Huck was directing his deputies. The town was returning to normal rhythms. But for Vesper, time had stopped in this parking lot with her son in her arms and the weight of 6 years lifting. 18 months later, the autumn sun rose over Ridgemont at 6:23 a.m. The valley was painted gold and orange. Mist clung to the low places. The air smelled like wood smoke and fallen leaves. Vesper Crane woke at 4:17 a.m. The alarm never sounded. She killed it before it could. But this time she rolled over and looked at the photograph on her nightstand. Her and Ender, taken 3 months ago. Both smiling. No shadows, no fear. Just a mother and son who had found their way home. The cabin still had bars on the windows, but they were on the outside now. Normal security. Nothing hidden. She did 73 pull-ups, the same number. But now Ender matched her from the doorway across the hall. They had made it a competition. Yet he was up to 68, getting closer. The drive to work took 12 minutes. The truck still had Oregon plates. But now it was a choice, not necessity. She could change them any time. She just hadn't. Ridgemont Tactical Response Academy occupied the space where the Valley Clinic used to be. The building had been expanded, federally funded. 3 wings, training facilities, classrooms, a tactical range. The sign at the entrance read, "Where Ghosts Become Guardians." She arrived at 5 a.m., not because she had to, because she wanted to. The academy had 6 instructors now, 12 students, all of them former operators, intelligence officers, soldiers who had done classified things and needed a new purpose. She taught combat medicine, tactical trauma, the kind of medicine that happened under fire, yet the kind that saved lives when everything was breaking. Ender arrived at 6 a.m. He was 17 now, taller, confident. He wore dog tags identical to hers, engraved with the same names: Martinez, Hopkins, Volkov. 3 names, 1 legacy. He taught language courses: Russian, Chechen, Arabic, the languages of conflict zones. He trained refugee medical teams how to communicate across barriers. Scout Holloway was lead instructor for the civilian paramedic program. 20 years old now. Confident, competent. Everything Vesper had trained her to be. She ran the emergency response protocols, taught disaster medicine, led the trauma teams. Dr. Holden Merrick was director of medical education. His white coat still had coffee stains, but his program was nationally recognized. Former operators came from across the country to learn how to transition from combat zones to civilian care. Bryony Marsh taught the ethics course, recovered operators program, how to integrate classified pasts with public futures, how to carry the weight of secrets without being crushed. And Dmitry Orlov consulted on counter-surveillance. House arrest had been commuted to community service after his testimony dismantled 3 Wagner Group cells and exposed their client networks. He taught from a wheelchair now. The logging truck accident had left him with permanent injuries. But his mind was sharp and his knowledge was valuable. He and Vesper maintained professional courtesy. Nothing more. She wore Martinez and Hopkins on her chest. He wore guilt on his face. Some debts could never be repaid, but they could be acknowledged. And that was enough. The morning briefing started at 7 a.m. Vesper stood in front of 20 people, instructors and students and federal liaisons. She reviewed the day's training, tactical scenarios, medical protocols, new students arriving next week. Her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, then set it face down. The message could wait. The academy day ran until 6 p.m. Students practiced chest decompressions, language immersion, tactical positioning, the integration of combat skills with humanitarian purpose. Everything Vesper had learned through 15 years of classified operations, now taught openly, legally, proudly. At 6:30 p.m., she sat in her office. The space was simple: desk, computer, filing cabinets. But the walls were different now. Photographs. Her in uniform with her unit. Martinez and Hopkins smiling. Ender as a baby. Ender now. At the town meeting, the night of the standoff, her receiving the commendation from the governor for establishing the academy, a life no longer hidden, a past no longer denied. The letter sat on her desk, plain envelope, no return address, federal postmark. She had received it that morning but had not opened it. Now she did. The paper was official, department letterhead, but the message was simple. Master Sergeant Volkov, the 7 remaining names have been handled. Contract fulfilled. Stop looking over your shoulder. Langley. She read it twice, then stood and walked to the small fire pit outside the academy, the one used for tactical scenarios and controlled burns, and the symbolic destruction of things that needed to end. She lit the letter, watched it burn. The paper curled and blackened and turned to ash. Yet the wind caught the fragments and carried them across the valley, into the Tennessee sky. Gone. Scout appeared from the academy building, saw the smoke, saw Vesper standing alone, approached quietly. What was that? The past. Vesper watched the last of the ash disappear, finally letting me go. Is it over? The question hung between them. Simple. Impossible. The kind of question that had 1,000 answers and none of them complete. Vesper looked back at the academy. Through the window she could see Ender teaching a class, his hands moving, his voice carrying, students leaning forward, engaged, learning. He was explaining the difference between formal and informal Russian, how context changed meaning, how one word could mean friendship or betrayal depending on tone. He caught her watching and smiled, just a small smile, but genuine. The kind of smile that said everything was exactly where it needed to be. Scout followed her gaze. He's good at this. He's better than good. Vesper's voice was soft. He's found his purpose. And he knows who he is. And he knows who I am. She paused. For 6 years I gave him up to keep him safe. Thought I was protecting him by staying away. Were you? I was protecting myself. From the guilt. From the fear. From having to choose between the mission and being his mother. She touched the dog tags, still wore them, would always wear them. But now they hung alongside a small photograph, her holding newborn Ender, past and present together. Scout was quiet for a moment. Then, was it worth it? All of it? The question Vesper had asked herself 1,000 times, in 8 different towns, under 8 different names, yet running from contracts and memories and the person she used to be. She looked at the academy, at the students learning to integrate their pasts with their futures, at the instructors teaching skills that used to be classified, at the program that was expanding to 3 more states, at the lives being saved and rebuilt and redirected, at her son teaching languages of war zones to people who would use them for healing, at Scout, who had followed her through chaos and come out the other side stronger, at this town that had stood between her and violence without being asked, at this life, built on truth, instead of running. I spent years saving people on battlefields I couldn't talk about. Her voice was steady, strong, the voice of someone who had made peace with impossible choices. And now I'm training the next generation to save people on battlefields they choose. She turned to look at Scout fully. And my son knows who I really am. Not the ghost, not the operator, not the legend, just his mother, who made terrible choices to keep him alive, who killed to protect him, who gave him up because she loved him. So yes. Vesper looked back through the window, at Ender laughing with his students, at the future she had never thought she would have. It was worth it. Scout nodded, didn't speak. Some truths did not need elaboration. They stood together in the evening light, teacher and student, operator and nurse, ghost and guardian. The boundaries blurred now. The definitions expanded. Inside the academy, classes ended. Students filed out. Conversations continued in the parking lot. Plans for dinner. Study groups. Yet the normal rhythms of institutional life. Ender emerged with his backpack, walked toward them. He had grown taller again. His shoulders broader, his movements confident. He was becoming the man he was meant to be, without the weight of her secrets, without the burden of her past. He stopped beside them, looked at the fire pit, the ashes. Ready to go home? Vesper smiled. The rare smile that Scout had only seen a handful of times in 7 years. The smile that said everything was exactly right. Yeah, let's go home. They walked to the truck together. Ender climbed in the passenger seat, Vesper behind the wheel. Scout waved from the academy entrance. The drive back to the cabin took 12 minutes. Same route, same landmarks, but different now. No checking mirrors constantly, no counting exits, no planning escape routes, just driving home. At the cabin, Ender went inside to start dinner, a skill he had learned from Syrian refugees at the academy. Vesper sat on the porch for a moment, watching the sun set over Ridgemont, over the valley that had become home, over the town that knew her name, all of them. The dog tags rested against her chest. Martinez, Hopkins, Volkov. 3 names, 1 story. The weight was familiar now, comfortable, not a burden, a reminder. Her phone buzzed. Text from Morrison, checking in. New students approved for next quarter. 15 applicants, all solid backgrounds. She replied, "Good. We'll be ready." Another text, from Dimitri, brief, professional. Student asked good question today about pattern recognition. Reminded me of Kandahar briefing, before everything. She stared at the message, thought about responding, about acknowledging, about forgiving. And then she set the phone down. Some messages did not need answers. Some wounds did not fully heal. They just stopped bleeding. Inside, Ender was cooking. The smell of spices and vegetables and something that might have been Lebanese or Turkish or Syrian drifted through the open door. Music played. He was humming. Off-key, but happy. Vesper stood and walked inside. Hung her keys on the hook by the door. The same hook she had used for 7 years. But now the wall beside it had photographs. Her in uniform. Ender as a child. The academy opening ceremony. Martinez and Hopkins smiling from a frame. Past and present. Integrated. Whole. Dinner was ready at 7 p.m. They ate together. Talked about the day. Students who struggled. Students who excelled. The new tactical scenario Vesper was designing. The interpreter training Ender was developing. A normal conversation. Family conversation. The kind Vesper had thought she would never have again. At 9 p.m., Ender went to his room to study. Russian literature. He was taking college courses online, planning to apply to Georgetown, international relations, following in her footsteps, but choosing his own path. Vesper sat at her desk, opened her laptop, reviewed the next day's training schedule, answered emails, updated lesson plans, the administrative work of running an institution. But on the corner of her desk sat a folded flag, American, presented at her official memorial in 2021, retrieved from storage after her immunity deal, the flag that had covered an empty casket while her mother cried. Beside it was a photograph, the academy dedication ceremony, Vesper cutting the ribbon, Ender standing beside her, Scout on her other side. Holden, Atticus, Bryony, Huck, the entire town behind them. The caption read, "Ridgemont Tactical Response Academy, where service continues." She touched the flag, the photograph, the dog tags, the physical artifacts of a life lived in pieces, now assembled, complete. Her reflection stared back from the darkened window. The same face, the same eyes, but different, softer around the edges. The hardness remained, would always remain, but tempered now, integrated with something else, something like peace. Outside, the valley was dark, stars visible without light pollution, the kind of darkness that used to make her count exits and check weapons and plan for violence. Now it was just night, beautiful, peaceful, home. She stood and walked to Ender's room, knocked softly. He looked up from his textbook. She leaned against the doorframe. "You okay, Mom?" "Yeah." She smiled, just wanted to say goodnight. "Good night." She turned to leave, then stopped. "Ender, I'm proud of you. You know that, right?" "I know." His smile was her smile. Rare, real. "I'm proud of you too." The words settled in her chest, next to the dog tags, next to the weight of Martinez and Hopkins, next to the memories of 8 towns and 8 names and 7 years of running. But lighter now, balanced. At 10 p.m. she stood on the porch one more time, looking at the stars, at the valley, at the life she had built from the ashes of the one she had burned. The question echoed. Was it worth it? She thought about Martinez, about Hopkins, about the 2 soldiers who died because of betrayal, about wearing their names so they would never be forgotten, about Dimitri who had sold them out, who was teaching now, who carried his own weight, about 8 towns, 8 names, 8 attempts to disappear, about Ender growing up without her, 6 years of birthdays and milestones and moments she had missed. About this town, these people, this academy where ghosts became guardians and classified pasts became public purpose. About standing instead of running. About truth instead of hiding. The stars gave no answers. They never did. But they witnessed. And sometimes that was enough. She went inside, locked the door, set the alarm, the same routine, but transformed. Because tomorrow she would wake at 4:17 a.m. and do 73 pull-ups and drive to the academy and teach combat medicine to people who needed new purpose. Because tomorrow Ender would teach languages and Scout would train paramedics and the work would continue. Because tomorrow the sun would rise over Ridgemont and the valley would wake and the life she had built would continue building. Not running, not hiding, not pretending, just living, as herself, finally. And yes, it was worth it. If you have ever had to build a new life from the pieces of an old one, your story matters. Share it if you feel called. And if these reflections on transformation and truth resonate with you, I would be deeply honored if you chose to join this community. Your presence here makes these stories possible.
I have to be honest. This story has been sitting with me since I finished writing it. And what keeps coming back is not the impossible shots or even the technical skill. It is the loneliness, the complete, absolute loneliness of being erased. Think about it. Senna Oaks spent 6 years doing something most people could not even imagine. She operated alone in some of the most dangerous places on Earth. She made shots that saved lives, stopped attacks, changed the course of events. And then she was just deleted. Not retired, not thanked, deleted, like she never existed. But what really gets me is that she accepted it. She signed the papers. She agreed to the erasure. And then she watched her partner try to fight back and end up dead on a highway in Montana. So she learned the lesson. Stay quiet. Stay invisible. Survive. That is what stayed with me. Not the action, not the drama, but the quiet weight of carrying something so significant and having absolutely no one to share it with. For 6 years, she was the only person who knew the truth. And that kind of isolation does something to a person. There is one moment in this story that I cannot stop thinking about. It is not the shots. It is not even the salute at the end. It is that morning, when she was sitting apart from the SEAL team, measuring wind and writing in her notebook. And one of them looked over and said, "Who is she targeting? The clouds?" It was meant as a joke. Just casual dismissal. The kind of comment you make without really thinking about it. But what that comment represented was erasure in real time. She was sitting right there, doing critical work, preparing calculations that would later save 40 lives, and to them, she was nothing. Not even worth basic respect. Just a meteorologist who wandered into the wrong place. What makes this moment so powerful is that she did not react. She did not defend herself. She did not explain who she was or what she was capable of. She just kept writing. Because she had learned that her value did not depend on their recognition. That her work mattered whether they acknowledged it or not. And I think that is the loneliest position a person can be in. Knowing you are capable of something extraordinary while the people around you treat you like you are invisible. Not hostile, not even unkind, just invisible. Like you do not matter enough to even be considered. This story is really about power and who gets to define competence. The SEAL team had every reason to believe they were the most skilled people on that ridge. They had been through years of training. They had combat experience. They had the credentials and the uniforms and the structure that said, "We are the experts here." And then someone who did not fit that structure, who had no visible markers of authority or capability, turned out to be more skilled than all of them combined. And that created a crisis, because our entire system of respect is built on visible markers, rank, credentials, history. When someone operates outside that system, we do not know how to see them. But what this story also reveals is the cost of operating in the shadows. Senna got to do meaningful work. She saved lives. She stopped threats. But the price was erasure. Complete erasure. No recognition, no record, no acknowledgement. And when she or her partner tried to challenge that erasure, the system protected itself, violently. That is the real tragedy here. Not that she was dismissed by a SEAL team one morning, but that the entire structure she served was designed to use her and then delete her. She was valuable as long as she stayed invisible. The moment she became visible, she became a threat. And I think that dynamic exists in a lot of places, not just in classified military programs, but in any system where certain people do critical work that others benefit from but never acknowledge, where competence is invisible until it suddenly cannot be ignored anymore. A lot of people watching this have probably felt some version of this. Maybe not at this scale, maybe not with life and death stakes, but the feeling of being underestimated, of doing work that matters and having it go unnoticed, of being in a room where people assume you do not belong, where they make dismissive comments without even realizing how much you are actually contributing. And the hard part is deciding how to respond. Do you speak up and defend yourself? Do you prove them wrong in the moment? Or do you do what Senna did and just keep working, knowing that your value does not depend on their recognition? There is no right answer, because the truth is, we all want to be seen. We all want our work to be acknowledged. It is human. But sometimes the systems we operate in are not designed to see us. And we have to decide whether we are going to fight that system, work within it quietly, or walk away entirely. Senna chose to work within it, and then she chose to walk away when the cost became too high. And I think there is something deeply human in that choice, in knowing when to fight and when to just survive. So I want to ask you something, and I am genuinely curious about your answer. If you were in Senna's position, if you had spent 6 years doing something extraordinary and then been erased for it, would you have stayed quiet, or would you have fought back like Marcus did, knowing it might cost you everything? And here's another question. Do you think the 40 soldiers who saluted her will actually remember her name in 5 years? Or will she become just another story they tell? The mysterious contractor who made impossible shots. Do you think that is enough? I do not know the answer. I think it depends on what you value, recognition or impact. Being remembered or just knowing you made a difference. Leave a comment and let me know what you think. What moment from this story stayed with you the most? And if you have ever felt invisible while doing something that mattered, I would love to hear about it. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.